The heist has always been a central part of storytelling in the cinema. Many early films, such as The Great Train Robbery of 1903, featured a heist as part of the action. However, it was only after World War II that the heist movie became a genre of its own, heavily influenced by film noir. The audience was caught up in the thrill of following the gang plan and carry out their audacious robbery. The heist movie could also be comic. In the 60s, the caper movie added glamorous locations and international casts. While the films may have become more violent since the 70s, the basic formula for the heist movie has remained popular. The assembly of the gang and the planning of the heist, the precision of execution of the robbery, and the messy aftermath of betrayal and capture.
I think that people like them because they forgive the participants, because they almost root for them, because they want to see the prize, them get the prize in the end. You know, like if they're going to steal $2 million, there's a certain amount of fulfillment and fun in seeing somebody get their hands on $2 million.
We want to idolize the thief, the robber, this person who outsmarts the system, but at the same time, you know, we have to be careful about making him venal.
I think I was born to be a thief. I imagine the problem and say, come on now, solve it. And so I'm obliged to solve it. I have this larceny in me.
The Killing, released in 1951, is the classic heist movie, strongly influenced by John Huston's The Asphalt Jungle, made a few years earlier. It centers on a robbery at a racetrack planned by Johnny Clay, a criminal who has just been released from prison and wants to do one last score before he retires from crime. The cast features such archetypal figures as the corrupt cop and the femme fatale, who eventually causes the tragic failure of the getaway. Strongly influenced by film noir, it was the first major film directed by Stanley Kubrick and produced by his longtime collaborator, James Harris.
When we met, we had decided that we would form a partnership of the two of us as producer-director. And so we called our company Harris Kubrick Pictures Corporation. And therefore, when we were searching for something to do as our first film together, I came across the book called Clean Break, which was the basis for The Killing.
What they were most attracted to, and this is interesting, is the idea that the story was non-linear, that it did not go from A to B to C, that it kept moving back and forth in time. And over the years, Kubrick has been given so much credit for, in a sense, inventing what Tarantino did much later, this whole idea of shifting time around. And it really was totally in the book.
We retained that same structure in the screenplay, which was a flashback of the different participants in the robbery of the racetrack, from their activities from the beginning of each day until the 7th race.
Rough drawing of the track as I remember it. Brandy, you'll have to get me an A1 street map of the whole district. George, Mike, I want you to go over this thing with me inch by inch. Bring it completely up to date.
The gang is assembled and it's made up of experts who all have a vital piece of expertise. They're professionals, and they come together and they have to be trained. They have to be told what the plan is. They have to be told what to do, how to do it.
The casting was marvelous, where Kubrick, you know, knew all just the right, wonderful character actors, and they're not stereotypes, but they're wonderful types.
You've got the mind, the money, the muscle, the mouth, the mouse, and the mole. The mind is obviously the mastermind. He's the guy who's thought it up.
Now, give or take a few thousand, I figure the loot on this deal at $2 million.
The Sterling Hayden character, we're told, has been in prison. And he, like many of these characters, you know, in this genre of heist films, is sort of mysterious. You know, you don't know a lot about him. He's very handsome. He has this great voice, and has a command about him, you know, that he's a leadership person.
The good, bad guy who's spent time in jail, but who we know is a really good fella, and who's at heart a decent human being, and who just wants this one last job.
5 years have taught me one thing, if nothing else. Anytime you take a chance, you better be sure the rewards are worth the risk, because they can put you away just as fast for a $10 heist as they can for a $1 million job.
You don't have to sell it to me, Johnny.
I think that he could evoke the empathy, sympathy, the rooting for aspect that one would like to hope they do when you make a film, that they root for your main character.
This is a real outright criminal. I mean, he's a horrible man, but somehow you get roped into following what he does. And in a way, you want him to succeed.
In many heist films, the robbery itself is successful, but the downfall of the characters is brought about by a femme fatale. A central figure in film noir, femme fatales such as Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity were manipulative and seductive, but inherently bad. In The Killing, Marie Windsor plays Sherry, the wife of one of the gang, who encourages her lover to steal the proceeds of the robbery.
It's interesting that Kubrick stuck to the rules. You know, he's really known as a genre buster, as someone who's reinvented a lot of genres. But he really stuck with it that Sherry, the character of Sherry, really is the classic, film noir woman who, through her own lust and machinations, destroys the whole caper.
We're going to have money, Val. More money than you ever dreamed of. Maybe even millions.
Oh, yeah? How?
George, that's how. He stumbled onto something big.
That meatball?
A meatball with gravy, Val.
The whole caper fell apart, really, in sections. You have the sort of the downfall of the participants caused by the greed of Vince Edwards, who was having a romance with Elijah Cook's wife, Marie Windsor. And somehow Marie Windsor was able to get the information out of Elisha Cook that the robbery was taking place.
She finds out about it and then spreads the news to her boyfriend, played by Vince Edwards, who's a real, sort of California muscle type, of the period, and then that leads to really the whole destruction of the plot.
They were all shot by Vince Edwards, and they all killed each other. But Sterling Hayden did make it to the airport with the money.
Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Preston, 9 o'clock flight for Boston.
Stanley and I were having dinner at the Automat in New York City before we went out to do the film, and we didn't really have an ending for the film at that time. And I said, wouldn't it be great, like, if they got as far as the airport and then we could figure out some way that all the money would blow away. And so we worked it out in that way, is that the dog would be responsible.
Stanley loved the arbitrary event that undoes great plans. And the arbitrary event, of course, is the yapping dog.
The bastard, come back here!
Stanley, I think, had a profound mistrust of the fates and saw events doing exactly what happens in The Killing. That is, the best laid plans of the wisest people go astray because of fools and lunatics and little animals and simply arbitrary events.
And then at the end, when he's faced with, the detectives, he basically just says, what's the use, he just gives up. He accepts his fate, which is also a trait that you see in a lot of heist films and a lot of noir films.
Johnny, you've got to run.
What's the difference?
The first reaction that we had was at a preview. I believe it was in Huntington Beach or some outlying little city around here. And I remember when the film ended, Stanley and I were anxiously awaiting reactions out in the lobby, and Sterling Hayden's agent came out. His name was Bill Schifrin. And he looked at the two of us and said, well, I guess you ruined my client's career. That was his reaction. So you could see we were off to a great start.
The cutting techniques used, the story structure used was, at that time, still radical enough to upset people and to confuse them.
The reaction was not great, but the reaction within the Hollywood community was amazing. you know, so many people had screening rooms, and Marlon Brando saw the film and absolutely adored it and got the word out, and as did a lot of studio people.
Once the picture opened and it got the good reviews that it did, people sort of used the flashbacks as an example of the difference that this picture was over most heist pictures or caper pictures that were made, and that they thought this was something special.
Because the killing so much captured, you know, the archetypes, the style, the tone, the mood, that, you know, almost immediately it started having an immediate influence. We didn't have to wait for Tarantino that many decades ahead, that it started influencing a lot of films, you know, in the 50s and in the 60s.
At almost exactly the same time as Kubrick and Harris were making The Killing, Jules Dassin was working on Rififi in Paris. An American director forced to Europe by the McCarthy blacklist in the 50s, Dassin had already made the classic film noir The Naked City in the States. In Rififi, he continued the gritty realism and reliance on real locations of that film, and produced a heist film that examined in minute detail the mechanics of planning and executing a robbery on a jewelry store.
The heist itself is normally very complicated. In the planning stage, you've already seen what they're going to do, so there's a lot of suspense. It's like Hitchcock said, to have suspense, you have to first tell them what's going to happen, then show them doing it.
We even go as far in Rififi is to show them how we want to do it. We're planning it. This, as a matter of fact, the producer came to me and said, well, if we're going to see the robbery, well, why show us all that detailed planning? And I thought it was important.
Toute vibration occasionnée par un choc sur une paroi provoque pendant une fraction de seconde une rupture des courants qui déclenche l'alarme par l'intermédiaire d'un système de relais.
It's a tough job. You've got to silence alarms. You've got to not make a sound. You've got to be alert to anything that could go wrong. And these guys do it well.
In all caper films, there's always this very meticulous planning where you see, you know, all the charts and every detail and going to the locations and checking them. And, you know, I think it's their, it's control. You know, it makes the criminals feel like they're going to succeed because they've thought of everything, even, you know, down to the smallest detail.
Tension comes from what the characters are doing and the audience's fear for their failure or wishes for their success. Any wrong move can undo them. And I think it works together. Audience and the characters are involved.
You're all the time on the side of the people who want to rob the jewelry store. I mean, it's just quite a manipulation, you know, because basically they're gangsters robbing a store, which is terrible.
The heist in Rififi is one of the most remarkable examples in the genre. For over 20 minutes, there is almost no dialogue or music, as our attention is focused on the minute details of the robbery itself.
Essentially, it's a silent film in the middle of the movie, where in real time, this crime that they've been planning is executed. And you are put in the position of, you feel as though, I mean, it's so well done, you feel as though you're at the crime.
I didn't need any dialogue. These people are so good at their jobs. Their contact with each other is so total and so alert. They don't need to talk.
You have the same anxiety, especially when they show, you know, they show the policeman coming up on his bicycle. And also the trust that the filmmakers had in the audience to figure things out as it was happening without it being explained.
There has to be this complete noiselessness. The guy touches by accident a piano note, and the audience gasps. They think the whole thing is a flop now, and the guys are going to get caught. Silence is a very important part of this kind of work. Don't make noise when you're stealing. It's wrong. It'll attract people, attract cops and all kinds of nice guys.
I remember the wonderful shot where they cut through the floor, which is to say the ceiling, you know, they're in that apartment, and then they stick the umbrella through, and the umbrella pops open to catch the dust and the crumbs so they don't set off the sensor. And you just, they trust you, and it's told well enough so that you figure it out.
One of the things that I find appealing about the heist, and that is because you're allowed to focus on minute detail. And I think that this is, you know, I don't know who it was who said this, but I mean, it's the idea of the fascination with the wall. If you just have a wall and you have a fly walking slowly across it, you can't take your eyes off it, where if you have a lot of quick cuts that are almost psychedelic, you can get up in the middle of it and you can go to the kitchen and get a beer or a sandwich or something. I think minute detail is riveting.
The most characteristic thing for me of a Rififi really is the relationships. You know, it's the whole idea that within, you know, the criminal world that you can't trust anybody, and there's that, you know, incredible dread of mistrust, and how that often leads to, you know, the destruction of the unit and then of the crime itself.
The aftermath. Well, you know, I'm sorry that things went wrong. Cherchez la femme, the Achilles heel. Our little Italian mechanic lost his head over a girl, and that started a whole trail of disasters.
Regarde ça. Il y a des bagues. De quelle sort? Un petit Italien complètement fondu qui l'a refilé à Viviane.
You see, that when we say the woman, cherchez la femme, causes the undoing, it is not during the work, during the robbery. The robbery is a success. And so it has no part of what the audience was really involved in. And they're used to people being punished. Maybe it's a hangover from the old censor dates. The crime doesn't pay. Crime does pay. You see it all the time. Even unrecognized crime, industrial crime, all kinds of selfish crimes. They pay.
By the end of the 50s, the heist was a familiar enough genre to be parodied. In I soliti ignoti, known in English as Big Deal on Madonna Street, a group of bungling criminals in Rome attempt a heist on a pawn shop. In showing their hapless attempts to emulate the scientific methods of the gang in Rififi, director Mario Monicelli parodied the classic formula for the heist.
He constructs what would be the comic opposite of those movies, which is to say, what if you did a heist, but nitwits were in charge of the heist? I think that's where, you know, it's the nitwit version of those earlier, much more serious heist movies.
Well, I soliti ignoti. The story is this. It's a group of people of the hoi polloi, poor people, and so on. And they get together to try to steal a safe from a pawnbroker. They are excited and driven by hunger, destitution, etc. And they are also very thrilled by a film that was at the time very successful. And that was called Rififi by Jules Dosan. They decide to carry out their plan, and the whole film revolves around them trying to be scientific and rigorous.
Adesso Salsa si avvicina alla cassaforte, fai attenzione, apri l'occhio, guarda come fa, Guardo. Vedrai che ripresa che... Giraci. Beh. Ma pure le mutande già stanno, non è fatto la ripresa in
showing the situation of Italian poor people trying to do something, and they were terrible. I mean, they couldn't do anything. And that's the funny of this script. They had a lot of ambition, but they cannot do anything. They're terrible.
La conosci questa? Sicuro che la conosco, è una pistola Beretta, ma è in cattivissime condizioni. 1000 lire.
I was the Sicilian who lives always in the house, and she's not allowed to speak to people. And the first day I was supposed to shoot a scene with Renato Salvatori, and I was supposed to crash the door on his face.
Ti voglio dire che non mi va che ti sposi quel buzzurro.
Non te permetto.
But I didn't know that you could do it fake. I did it on, real. He couldn't shoot all day. The face was totally transformed. And Mario Monicelli talked to me and he said, Claudia, in the movie, you're not obliged to do it, in that way.
In I soliti ignoti, the classic heist motif of breaking into the safe is subverted when the gang succeed only in breaking into the fridge after knocking a hole in the wrong wall. However, in a post-war Italy where there was great hunger and poverty, food itself was a valuable prize.
The ending, which is on the one hand very funny, but on the other hand quite pathetic, because it's a failure. As they didn't manage to get through to the safe, at least they ended up somewhere where there was some food. And for the Italians, pasta fagioli, pasta in general, was essential.
Ragazzoli, ho paura che abbiamo rotto la cannella del gas, non si
I think that the heist almost lends itself to slapstick because of the fact that it is involved with the kind of detail that can go awry and that can be exaggerated and made into really very physical kind of comedy.
Like I soliti ignoti, the Italian Job is set in Italy, but it is a film as English as I soliti ignoti is Italian. The story of a heist on a security van in Turin, it's a light-hearted caper movie that is influenced by the early Bond movies. Released in 1969, it exploits the self-confidence and stylishness of 60s Britain, from the sharp suits of Michael Caine to the remarkable stunts by the minis used for the getaway.
The Italian Job was set very firmly in the 60s. You knew from this movie that England had won the World Cup in 1966. Britain was great at that time. And so you had this cheeky Cockney arranging for this incredible heist to take place during a football match. And what's more, we're taking money from foreigners, which is always a good thing in an English movie.
It wasn't a great caper movie in any pure sense. It only became a great caper movie because of the characters and the, I suppose, lightness of the piece. Were it reliant upon being serious, a lot of better pictures have been made, Top Carpy, for example, and lots of other tougher movies have been made with capers. This was a light-hearted view of it, and it was the first sort of Eurosceptic movie. It was the picture which was saying, OK, we can show these guys, without being too tough about it, that we're better.
It couldn't be more British than Michael Caine, Noel Coward, Fred Emney, Benny Hill, Irene Handel. You couldn't have anything more British than that.
It didn't seem a very good idea, as far as the actors are concerned, to have a picture which hung just on Michael when he's playing with a gang of people. We felt we should have a lot of other people to help. Noel Coward was an obvious counterpoint, and he did 2 weeks on the picture, made a big difference to the picture.
It's all here. Maps, drawings, plans, everything.
You've been put up to this, haven't you? You've been bribed to upset my natural rhythm and ruin my health.
During the boring part of the picture, which is the setup part of the picture, we had good, funny comic sketches, which helped to drag the picture up to the whole point of it, which is the car chase. And you've got to play 95 minutes or something of a film, you've got 30 minutes of car chase, you've got an awful lot of stuff to fill in beforehand.
Camp Freddy, everybody in the world is bent.
Originally they were going to shoot in Milan, but Lord Harlech, being a friend of Michael Deely's, said, why don't you shoot it in Turin? If you shoot it in Turin, I can get you all the cooperation you want from Gianni Agnelli and from the Torinese police. Shoot it there.
Turin was a perfect town for us. It was perfectly constructed and there was freedom. I mean, there's an old rule which is that if you want to shoot a picture on location, try to go to a dictatorship. Don't try and do it in a democracy because it will cost you a fortune in paying people off.
In the Piazza Reale, I wanted a traffic jam. And as the Italians were going to lunch, I had all but one of the exits of the Piazza Reale blocked off. The light van blocked off one, the canteen van blocked off another, the camera van blocked off a third, and so on. So the traffic came in, but they couldn't get out. And it piled up, and it piled up, and it piled up, and the noise was unbelievable. And if they'd seen the camera, we'd have been lynched.
It's very difficult to go back to a town and shoot after somebody else has been there first, because the destruction and the inconvenience caused by film units is so considerable that they normally won't let you back.
The most striking aspect of the Italian job was the stunts performed using minis, the archetypal car of the swinging 60s in Britain. Whereas before, the getaway had been a relatively minor aspect of the heist genre, the Italian job turned it into the most important part of the film, with the help of the brilliant stunt driver, Remy Julien.
Remy Julien is probably the greatest of all stunt drivers. It isn't so much his technical ability, which is limitless, it's his imagination. People have never seen this in the British film. I mean, they had seen car chases, but never seen minis doing that kind of thing. They'd never seen minis running through a sewer and almost doing a complete circle. They'd never seen minis running through a weir. They'd never seen minis driving up at speed into the back of a coach. They'd never seen minis jumping 60 feet.
About the big leap, A, we knew it worked on the ground, therefore why wouldn't it work? I mean, if you put a ramp, you rise the thing. So we knew in theory and in practice it had worked so far. It's true, however, to say that in Italy at that time there was a rule which said that whoever's responsible for production, should there be an accident, would be asked to attend the jail until he or she could prove themselves not responsible. And Mr. Agnelli, in whose factory we shot this thing, on his rooftops, very kindly provided a good car and driver and an aeroplane in case the worst happened, in which case the producer would be whisked away to express his condolences from a further field. And that's unfortunately never happened. The idea is this thing, as far as I was concerned, was designed for a sequel. And I had exactly worked out precisely how they get away and get the bus off the thing and the girl and what the next film would be about. And what happens, I went to California to meet with Bob Evans at Paramount, and we had these various endings, and it actually occurred to me on the way, I said, we've got to have a cliffhanger ending, and it came from the actual word cliffhanger.
There was this ending, and nobody liked it. So what do? You give it to the second unit and say, you shoot it. There was no way we could lose to the coach. We would be in dead trouble. So a large eye was welded to the front of the coach, and a large eye was driven into the other side of the road, and a steel cable put to it. I think I got it in my script. I did a little drawing of it. And it was balanced on a sort of cradle, and we were doing a sort of seesaw job with the coach.
Hang on a minute, lads. I've got a great idea.
They haven't lost at the end of the movie. For all we know, Michael Caine could actually find a way of getting that gold from the end of that bus at the end of that's hanging over a cliff.
The sequel to The Italian Job was never made after the film flopped in America. However, Michael Dealey had already planned how the original cliffhanger ending would be resolved.
When people said, how would you get out of this, which is rather important if we're going to try and make a sequel, it happened as he was doing his I've got a great idea thing. This noise comes in, which is a helicopter coming in, Apocalypse Now sort of sound, and it lifts up the front of the truck, and all the gold of the bus, all the gold rolls out the back, and the feathers roll out on top of it. And they've sort of succeeded, except, of course, they're surrounded by the mafia, who pick up the gold and get in their cars, zoom off, and this disconsolate gang of Englishmen are sort of stuck on this street in this road in the mountains and have to get the gold back. So it's about them getting the gold back from the mafia.
After the wit and stylishness of 60s caper movies, the genre became darker and more violent. This would culminate in one of the most famous debuts in cinema history, Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs.
Well, it's really funny because, you know, you can't watch TV without, you know, for a day, without seeing or hearing some sort of influence from Tarantino's pictures.
Reservoir Dogs is a good example of a filmmaker who knows films. This is a film with so many references to so many other heist movies and other types of movies, from the French New Wave, from The Killing, from City on Fire. It's just enjoyable. It's for any other film buff to watch.
There's a little bit of almost every movie in every one of his movies. I think that there's an old saying, I think it was a musician who said it, but that when you steal from one source, it's called plagiarism. When you steal from 5 sources, it's called research. I met Quentin at a restaurant called C.C. Brown's on Hollywood Boulevard, and he arrived by streetcar because he didn't even own a car at the time. And C.C. Brown's was a very famous old restaurant where they famous for hot fudge sundaes. So Quentin and I each had a hot fudge sundae, and he apologized for wasting my time because he said that he had just sold True Romance, and he had something like $50,000, and he said if he had to, he would make Reservoir Dogs for $50,000, but he was going to direct it himself. And I said I didn't feel my time had been wasted, and I was really happy to meet him. I had a feeling that he was talented. I'd never seen anything he'd done, but I could, you know, he just exudes this kind of confidence, and so because he's so confident, you feel confident about him. And I said, if there's anything I can do to help you, I'd be happy to. And he says, yeah, you can help me, you know, get the movie made. So that's what happened.
The beginning of Reservoir Dogs introduces the gang to the audience. We don't know who these people are, but very quickly we understand what type of people they are.
You don't tip. What do you mean you don't tip?
They don't believe in it.
Shut up. What do you mean you don't believe in it? Come on, you. Cough up a bucket, cheap bastard. I paid for your goddamn breakfast.
All right, since you pay for the breakfast, I'll put in, but normally I would never do this.
Never mind what you normally would do.
It's a luxury. It's a kind of scene that you wouldn't find in many movies because you normally would get into the heart of the story more quickly. But because it's so entertaining and funny, it allows us to forget that what we're really getting is a kind of exposition and an introduction to those characters.
And the kind of staccato way that he cut his scenes together, going back to something that happened before, something else you haven't seen. It's a very divisive thing to do.
I'm hungry.
Let's get a taco.
But I think that it created a whole new approach to filmmaking and the whole genre.
The interesting thing about Reservoir Dogs is, of course, you never see the heist. You know, you see people running away from it, you see them assembling the plan, and you see most of the movie is about the denouement, about the irony, the way everybody crosses and double crosses each other.
Reservoir Dogs investigates the theme of betrayal in the central relationship between Mr. Orange, an undercover cop played by Tim Roth, and Mr. White, played by Harvey Keitel. The development of the relationship is highly influenced by Ringo Lam's Hong Kong heist movie, City on Fire.
In City on Fire, Chow Yun-fat is a cop undercover. He's torn between his comradeship for this gangster and his duty to the police. And this is part of the problem with that Tim Roth faces in Reservoir Dogs.
I think the betrayal in Reservoir Dogs is really the core of the movie. I mean, that's where the drama is. And the drama comes also out of the friendship, the fact that these two men, I mean, that's the love story. It's definitely a love story, and the fact that they care about each other is almost more important than anything else.
Who's a tough guy? Come on, who's a tough guy? I'm a tough guy. Who's a tough guy? You're a tough guy.
There's a kind of Hitchcockian sense of humor about Quentin, and I think that the violence in Reservoir Dogs, I mean, my wife hates movie violence. I mean, she shuts her eyes and doesn't even want to go see a movie if she's heard that there's any violence in it. The violence in Reservoir Dogs doesn't bother her. And it's because I think it's funny. We know it's not real. There's something that it almost appeals to the sadism in everyone.
Quentin's movies are violent, but they're also kind of black humor. You know what I mean?
Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
I needed to hear that song because it helped me a lot. And they gave me a little transistor that I wore, and they played that Stuck in the Middle, that Steelers Wheel song. And so throughout the whole scene, I was able to hear what would be ultimately used in the movie, and it really helped me through that scene. It gave me something to react to in a major way.
Violence has become much more acceptable in the movies nowadays. And I think particularly in the Reservoir Dogs, the violence is probably more influenced by the movies of Hong Kong, like the movies of John Woo and Ringo Lam. Hong Kong movie makers of the mid-80s to mid-90s were very much influenced by American movies of the 70s and 60s. Films like Bonnie and Clyde, films of Sam Peckinpah, films which showed extreme ultra-violence. And also that type of violence is much more accepted in their markets because it's a very surreal violence, it's a comic book violence.
In Japan, the director Takeshi Kitano has created wholly original gangster and heist movies in which scenes of extreme violence, as in Hong Kong cinema, are set among periods of meditative stillness or absurdist humor. In his film, Hanabi, an ex-cop commits a heist to go on a last trip with his seriously ill wife. But the heist itself is downplayed, seen through security camera footage.
Well, the bank robbery scene, you normally get machine guns going off, terrified bank employees, that kind of thing. And people say it looks realistic or whatever. But it's all from action movies. They're basing their opinions on other movies, you see. It's not as if any of them have seen a real heist. And I thought the closest things to reality that most people have seen would be the footage from the video monitors, you know, the security cameras.
The case of Kitano is an interesting case. He revived a genre. He revived the Yakuza genre, and he turned it into something which looks to young people fairly new. It's got a lot of very high gloss. He obviously learned a lot from like genre films in America, but he brought with it his own sensibility and his own sense of, you know, angry anarchy, which is his trademark. So he sort of made a mini genre for himself, one just people are following. You know, there's a lot of directors who are doing the same thing he has done. He still does it with a sense of detachment, which is very noir of him. He sort of invented Japanese noir, come to think of it.
なんだ兄貴来てんだよちょっと来いよどこ行くんだいいから来いよん来りゃいいんだよ
I tried to pare down the story and the shooting style as well, as much as I could, or perhaps more than I should have. I also tried to keep the number of shots to a minimum, so not only in terms of performances, but in terms of the whole cinematic style of the film. It was simplified.
今度会ったら殺すって言ったろう
People slightly puzzle over them because they think they're heist films, and they think they are, you know, their favorite violence genre, and yet they behave differently, and they tantalize our expectations.
Ben.
What he does not include the humanist, what? Cliche in the West of showing that, well, he may have done this, but at heart he was a good boy. You know, we see this over and over. Any Humphrey Bogart, any James Cagney. And when at the end, he was a great man nonetheless, says Cagney's mother in one of these things, right? It's that sort of thing is missing in Kitano. We don't have social justification. In fact, society doesn't exist in Kitano. And this is the great puzzlement to the West and the great temptation, because wouldn't it be nice if no society existed? And I think this is one of the reasons why he sells so well. He's showing us a sort of a dark vision of the future that seems more and more possible every day, and it's as frightening as it is exhilarating.
In contrast, American cinema continues to draw inspiration from classic 60s heist movies. One of the best examples of these remakes was 1997's The Thomas Crown Affair, which was produced by and starred Pierce Brosnan. Here, as opposed to violent modern heist movies such as Reservoir Dogs, the heist itself was an ingenious and elegant art theft.
Well, we changed just about everything in the story. We kept the premise, which is cat and mouse between a very glamorous and very sophisticated female insurance investigator and a very wealthy thief who does it on a dare.
No, he's a corporate raider. He's ruthless. We have him with all the toys and all the money, the power, the penthouse, whatever it is, he's got it.
I thought a lot about Thomas Crown's character, and I felt that it would be really venal if he stole money, because it had to be clear to the audience that he was doing this for a higher reason than the money.
The first thing that had to be changed was a bank robbery. And what really gave me the epiphany that it couldn't be a bank robbery was seeing the movie Heat, which I think, Michael Mann's film, which really showed you what bank robbers have to go through in the modern age with technology to rob a downtown LA bank. And I went, this is supposed to be an elegant, playful movie. I don't really want to see this guy doing those things. And so I thought it had to be a more bloodless, playful kind of a heist. And that basically left you with some old lady's diamond collection in her penthouse or a museum. So we picked the museum. And one thing I definitely didn't want was to have Pierce hanging from a rope in the Metropolitan Museum like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. The guy was a wealthy businessman, and there's no way he would be capable of doing such feats. So in the nod to logic, my idea was perhaps that a diversionary heist could be going on over here. So he himself could just simply take the painting off the wall, something that it was plausible that he could do.
We talked a lot, I mean, about what was it? Is he going to do a computer heist? Was he going to, you know, take billions? Or was he, you know, we talked, like, what is the thing that would be interesting? And visually, it was just a Monet. I mean, it just seemed to suit him. Here's a man who's got everything, and you get the American dream, and you're like, hang on, but I'm empty. So he's got to go out and do something with his mind that's just brilliant, just dangerous, to get a jolt, to feel something.
He was doing these terribly dangerous, potentially self-destructive things because he had an empty life. And the irony is that at the time he does the most dangerous thing, it causes him to meet the person that would fill up the hole in his life.
You left yourself wide open.
All flushed.
How many people can forge a Monet? 5, maybe 6?
She turns out to be a very worthy adversary for Pierce, and of course at the base of that worthy adversary thing is what makes them so sexually and emotionally attracted to each other. But of course one is trying to put the other in jail.
The two of them are both complex and worthy adversaries. How do you fall in love with someone you know you can't trust?
Isn't that what you wanted, my trust? Tomorrow afternoon, I'll put the Monet back.
Ultimately, they had to learn to trust themselves enough to let go. And I think that it was more about her falling in love with him than him knowing that he'd fallen for her.
We wanted to know about the guy and the girl. We wanted to know if these two people who had given up on the possibility of finding comfort in the opposite sex were going to make it. It's a last chance story. It was last chance for both of them.
Did you set this up? What? Did you set this up? Did you? Please. The seatbelt sign is still...
He, in effect, pulled off the greatest heist of his life. He stole the girl's heart.
Heists are foils for human relationships, and that the heist is never the raison d'etre for the film. It's really the raison d'etre for defining the relationships within the film, for defining the relationships between Thomas Crown and the Rene Russo character, or characters from any other film.
Heists are fun. Heists are joyous. Heists are you can enjoy what the bad guy is doing.
We want them to succeed. We care about them getting away with it, even though we know in our heart of hearts that they're not going to.
llegaste, mi amor?
Acostada tan temprano.
Ay, estoy muerta. ¿Cómo te fue?
Bien, bien. Oye, le avisaste a los Suaste que sí íbamos a ir mañana a su comida, ¿verdad?
Claro, ¿cómo vamos a faltar al homenaje del padre Santiago?
¿Y quién más va a ir, eh?
Pues ya sabes, la Cuca Magadares del club, Everardo Iturriaga, un matrimonio de Celaya que no sé ni quiénes son, los Iracheta de la Cerda y el socio de Chucho.
Y huele raro, ¿no?
Oye, flaco.
Dime.
Ay, oí unos ruidos en el cuarto de Marce.
Debe haber tenido otra de sus pesadillas, pobre Marta.
No. Estas no eran pesadillas. Eran otra clase de ruido.
¿Qué clase de ruidos?
Ay, flaco. Pues esa clase de ruidos, tú sabes.
No te preocupes, Chapis. Acabo de pasar por su recámara para decirle buenas noches. Y está solita tratando de dormir.
Bueno, yo te juro que oí ruidos, ¿eh?
¿Qué sugieres que haga?
Deberías checar, flaco. No puede ser que haya metido al novio, imagínate.
Marce. Lo dudo. Es incapaz.
Pues una nunca sabe. Ya ves lo que le pasó a la especial. Ay, deberías checar, flaco. No me vas a decir la de recochina.
Bueno, nada más para que estemos tranquilos, ¿eh?
Estoy harto de que siempre estés burlándote de mí. Si hay algo insoportable en esta vida.
No tardo.
Ve con Dios.
Bueno, al grano, ¿qué quieren?
Tenemos sobre un documento. Vístete, vete.
¿No puedes dormir, mijita? ¿Te sientes mal? Volviste a pelear con tu novio, ¿verdad? Ay, ¿qué quieres que te diga, mi amor? Déjalo ir. Además, si he de ser totalmente franco, mija. No te me vayas a enojar, ¿eh? Pero la verdad es que tu novio se huele a chivo, mi amor.
Ay, ¿cómo crees? Eso no es cierto, pa. ¿Dónde dejaste mis pantaletas?
¿Cuáles?
Ay, no me digas que no las tienes.
¿Cuáles son las? Ah, mi amor. Acuérdate que mañana tenemos una comida en casa de los Suaste.
¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué?
Ahí viene.
¿Qué? ¡Métete al closet!
La línea deportiva.
Apúrate. Aprovecha, se bajó. Y abusado, no vayas a hacer ruido al salir. Y ten cuidado con el Rex, que muerde horrible. Oye, me la debes. ¿Qué? ¿Te trago el excusado o qué?
No, es que pues, estuvo bien, cabrón. Es que llegó tu jefe y me tuve que esconder.
Ay,
Es que olí tus frijolitos.
ay, Nanita. ¿Qué te pasa?
Nos van a poner tus jefes.
Ay, no seas maricón. Grito, ¿eh? ¿No? ¿No quieres que grite?
No, Marcia, espérate.
¿No? ¿Te va a gustar?
No, Marcia, espérate.
No seas aguado.
Espérate. Marcia. Ay, híjole.
¿Les pusiste pasote?
A su gusto, señor.
Están en su punto.
¿Usted dirá? Ay, ay, me encanta tu olor. Ay, bebé, chivito. Quédate, ¿no? Ándale. ¿Sí? ¿Te quedas?
A los centros de Didyme-Dôme.
pasó, nena?
Tuve una pesadilla, ma.
Ay, chiquita. ¿Pero ya estás bien?
Sí, ya se pasó.
Ay, chiquita. Reza un Padre Nuestro. Con eso se te pasa el susto.
Bueno, gracias.
¿Le seguimos, Chelita?
Ay, nanita.
Seguro tuvo otra pesadilla.
¡Nada! Un vaso de leche, porfa.
¡Voy!
Quiero más. Ándale, nos echamos un ratito y no va a venir nadie.
Aquí tiene.
Gracias, Chelita.
A sus órdenes.
Ah, sí, claro. La debes, ¿eh?
Que descanse.
Ya voy.
Oye, ¿mis chones?
¿Qué chones?
Ay, no pierdas.
No, no, no.
Chivito, mi amor, mi vida, no te vayas, por favor.
Otra pesadilla, mi amor.
Sí, pa, estuvo horrible.
Échate 2 Aves Marías, nunca falla. Que duermas con los angelitos, mi amor.
Igualmente, papi.
Apaga tu luz, ¿eh?
Oye.
¿Qué?
Shh. Vamos con el ex, ¿eh? Sabes que me duele muy feo.
Hey.
Me la debes.
Simón. Deberíamos escapar ese perro, caray.
Oye, estaba pensando que deberíamos de llevar mañana un buen platón de chongos Zamora.
Muy buena idea, Chapis. El padre Santiago es michoacano. ¿No te huele como a chivo?
Más bien me huele como a frijoles.
Es que me eché un taquito allá abajo.
Ah, flaquito, venías con hambre.
Una poquita nada más.
Me hubieras dicho. Ay. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.